Hey everyone! So I made a video discussing Black women in Big Brother USA history, and I've noticed within recent years that there's another ethnic casting choice that is starting to take place: the Italian male. Obviously, I've noticed this trend going on with how they cast their Italian men in recent years, but in order to look through it all, I have to go from the very beginning and see how things either remained the same or changed. So let's get to it. Also, before I actually start the video, I'm going to note that I am sure that I am missing some house guests, especially because it is harder to find out certain people's nationalities and ethnicities of the earlier seasons because a lot of that information has been lost to time and the internet, and it's not truly discussed on the show. So I'm going to go based off of the ones that I know for sure, though I'm positive that I'm missing some on the list. So, yeah. So the first person that I'm going to discuss is Dr. Well. It was mentioned that he was born in Italy, but nothing else pertaining his ethnicity, nationality, etc. was ever brought up during any of his 2 seasons. He was arrogant but charismatic and a strategic mastermind in his 2 seasons, and was also very humorous, but none of it was used in a stereotypical or an archetypical lens, where it was connected to him being Italian or any tropes about Italians. In general, when he wasn't playing it up for the cameras, he was a generally calm, relaxed, and personable and normal presence. So I liked that he was just himself, he was just a person. He wasn't a stereotype or a trope for Italians. So we're going to move on to a season and discuss Roddy. The main thing about Roddy was his charisma, but it was a different sense of charisma compared to Will, as he generally liked to make people feel good about themselves, but he severely gaslit people when they didn't do what he wanted. And I remember house guests like Marcellus commenting how it wasn't the best look because he was a strong young white man doing this to other minority or underprivileged groups of people. Roddy was very image conscious and wanted to present himself as a good guy, which worked out very well for a very early Big Brother. And when I mean very early, I'm referring to BB2 and BB3, where house guests were eliminated and everyone was a part of the jury, and they would make their votes based on what they saw on the episodes. Roddy wasn't naturally funny or sold himself through the DR in the same way Will did, but like Dr. Will, Roddy was his own person, and he wasn't pushed into any archetypes that involved him being Italian. So we're going to move on to a season and discuss Justin, and I really don't have much to say about him in general. Nothing was brought up pertaining his Italian ethnicity, but he was portrayed as quote-unquote America's golden boy, and the cool kid, cool son, the one to beat, so on and so forth. I also think he's one of the few who didn't get a family segment during the season, so that might play a part into it. He was athletic and immature, but nothing pertaining being Italian, or none of his traits were used in a stereotypical manner. He was very bro-centric, and I know he made a lot of awful comments on the feeds that obviously didn't make it onto the episodes, but I think it's a reflection of the era that he was in, where they didn't play it off to be a trope or whatever, and a lot of the tropes that would be associated with Italians in reality TV weren't formed by the time of 2003. So we are skipping 4 years and 4 seasons, and now we are going to discuss Evil Dick. He has consistently auditioned since Big Brother 5, so if he made it onto that season, they would have been 4 Italian men who are known to be Italian in 4 back-to-back seasons, but that didn't happen. Dick's personality was very confrontational, aggressive, blunt, in your face, and very polarizing, and that's me putting it very nicely. He harassed most of the players in the house during his season, but was edited like a conflicted guy with a heart of gold at times, mainly due to his relationship with his daughter. Despite his many poor qualities, none of it was tied to his nationality or bad stereotypes associated with Italian people. So even despite his less than savory personality, he wasn't used as an Italian trope. So we're going to move on a season in about 7 or 8 months and talk about Alex from Big Brother 9. Here is where there starts to be some sort of shift with this, where I noticed that they are casting around Italian archetypes. Alex is a very heavily accented, overtly masculine, male-aligned, bro-centric obsessed with New Yorker, and he is aligned with Matt, who has the same mentality. I don't know if Matt is Italian, hence why I did not put him on the list. But if he is, he also played into a lot of the Italian archetypes, with the tough guy, blatant misogyny, and a lot of the traits that we would see in Jersey Shore and Real Housewives of New Jersey, which would ironically air a year after this, though I think both were filmed in the same year. So 2 years later and 3 seasons later, we get Enzo. If there weren't some strides or setbacks based on how they casted Italian men with Big Brother 9, they stuck their foot into it with Big Brother 12. Enzo had the thick accent, obnoxious so-called humor, bragging about being a tough guy, misogynistic undertones, obsession with being with the guys, seeing others who don't share his traits as negative, so on and so forth. They would go to him for diary rooms to push their narratives, and we saw that he was a sore loser on both of his seasons. Also, there wasn't much growth at all between his 2 seasons, especially pertaining the archetype that they clearly pushed him to be, and he aligned with the other brocentric Italian men, who I might as well speak about next. But from here on out, most of the men who fit this ethnic archetype were cast in either New Jersey or New York. And it's very ironic that a lot of the tropes based off of Italian people in reality TV were either in New Jersey, the Real Housewives of New Jersey, for an example, or Jersey Shore, which had people from New York and New Jersey in it. Now let's get on to his final 2 ride or die in Cody. We skip a few seasons and a few years, and he is cast as he's the flirtatious eye candy of the season, and does not exhibit the obnoxious traits that Enzo had. He does have the heavy accent, a lot of the toxic masculinity traits, bro-centric and male-aligned obsessed, and the need to show how tough and manly he is, with how he wanted to confront so many people, but of course he never did. I remember Cody stating a lot during the feeds that he wanted to be tough and not a PUSSY, which his brother would claim him as. While his flirtatiousness were ceased in the 2nd season, most of the traits that I mentioned earlier pertaining to him remained. So in the same season, we had Frankie. He is easily the most obnoxious person on this list, which says a lot, to be honest, but I'm not sure if a lot of it has to do with him being Italian, and production using archetypes to be associated with it. You could say that he was cast to fill the archetypes and behaviors that CBS in general likes to have with their gay house guests, and you wouldn't be wrong with that. They did cast 2 Italian men in BB16, and knowing that Cody didn't have a loud and boisterous personality, Frankie was most likely cast to somewhat fill that role instead. Of course, him being related to Ariana, who broke out in the year earlier as a huge star, played a part into his casting and wanting his obnoxiousness on the show. We are going to skip a year and discuss Jason. So with Jason, he was cast the year after Frankie was and filled a very similar archetype as him, not only with due to their sexuality, but their nationality/ethnicity as well. Jason also had the very heavy accent, snappy, confrontational, obnoxious attitude that Frankie had, but it got even more amplified in Big Brother Over the Top. Like many of the others who came before him and after him, they decided to cast their Italian house guests from the northeastern states, mainly New York and New Jersey, which clearly increased once Jersey Shore and the Real Housewives of New Jersey blew up, in addition to other reality shows like Mob Wives, Jerseylicious, so on and so forth. So we spoke about one Calafiore, and now we're going to move on to the other Calafiore in Paulie. So seeing how Cody performed, and Cody consistently mentioning how his brother was more quote-unquote tough and quote-unquote masculine on the feet in Big Brother 16, casting him was an interesting choice, and I think he showed a lot of the traits that Big Brother likes when casting Italian men. Paulie is loud, confrontational, has a heavy accent, has a lot of misogynistic tendencies, is obsessed with being tied to the bros. We saw him throw his romance with Zakia under the bus several times, gaslight her, treated all the women horribly, and fits the quote-unquote aggressive Italian man stereotype that has plagued reality TV over the last decade. And he would continue with this not only on his social media, but throughout his career on the Challenge reality show. We skip a few years and move on to Tommy. He is the next Italian male to be cast after Paulie, from my recollection. He is not aggressive or obsessed with masculinity like some of the others that were cast in recent seasons, but he does have the heavy accent that BB likes to emphasize. He was from the Northeast and fit into the obnoxious character traits that Big Brother likes to push with their Italian and homosexual house guests. But in general, Tommy was more toned down and was focused on being the peacekeeper in the house. So we are going to move on to Brent, who is another Northeasterner and was the first one cast after the diversity quota that CBS put on all the reality shows. So, of course, Cody ends up winning BB-8. Yes, that's what I call the second All-Stars. And Brent is cast in the season afterwards. I don't know if they were hoping that he turned out like Paulie, who's a lot more aggressive, or Cody, who is a lot more charming, or a combination of both. But it's clear he was supposed to follow in one of their footsteps. He had the toxic masculinity traits, borderline misogynistic energy with how he treated some of the women in the house, the heavy accent, and seemed like a Calafiore clone. Outside of all of that, he was mainly used as a punching bag for everyone to make fun of, as they blindsided him out of the house. And now we're going to talk about the most recent and final addition to the list in Pooch, who's on the season that is currently happening right now, Big Brother 24. He fits right in with many of the other Italian guys I discussed. Very bro-centric, was borderline misogynistic with some of his commentary, very loud, abrasive, talkative, so on and so forth. But he's from Florida, so that's interesting that they moved on from the Northeast with how they cast the Italian men. Like Brent, the overall coverage he got was everyone kind of clowning him with how out of touch he was and how he was going to be blindsided. I'm wondering if they're intentionally casting guys like him and Brent now in this new diversity era of Big Brother so they could be fodder and so everyone can kind of poke at them. I hope not, but you never know with how CBS casting works. So that is my little spiel on the history of notable Italian male house guests on Big Brother, and you definitely notice that after a while they start putting them into these archetypes and stereotypes that Italian men are overall associated with, either being very obnoxious, very aggressive, being very out of touch, being very tough, so on and so forth. And it sucks that Big Brother and CBS aren't allowing these men to be their own people, their own characters, but pushing them to be in a slot. Maybe I'll make more of these ethnic, racial stereotypes and archetypes in Big Brother, and we'll see where it goes. Thank you all for watching my little hot topic, and I'll be back with something soon.